What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Wednesday edition of Back Your Play with Q. I'm your host, as always, Rich Quinones. We are brought to you by our wonderful friends over at Play It Again Sports, 1450 Clements Bridge Road in Deptford, New Jersey. And don't forget to check them out, put in the location online, tell them that you heard about their ad right here on BYP, and you'll get 30% off, or you'll add it on to your buy. So not a bad deal. Go see my friends over there. They do a wonderful job as the AFC NFC championship games are set. Championship weekend in the NFL. We got through wild card. We got through divisional matchups. Lloyd Vance, our good friend, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football 1029 The Game, part of the Broad Street South Network, and of course our contributor on Q and BYP, kind enough to join us on this edition of BYP. And I think at the end of the day, we got the four best teams, and there's intriguing matchups. Now, I guess let's kind of rewind for a moment, and we'll start with the NFC side because, quite frankly, I thought the 49ers looked a little rusty. We knew Green Bay was going to give them a little bit of a game. Green Bay had ample amount of chances. San Francisco, they're going to need Deebo Samuel Sunday against the Lions, but a little surprised by some of the decision-making late by Jordan Love. I think the Packers showed you that maybe they're a year or two early, but if you're a Packers fan, you love what they're building there. San Fran, they have that veteran moxie, that pedigree, right? And for a quarterback in Brock Purdy, who no one's giving any type of respect to, he actually had a really good drive late to help the 49ers get back to the NFC Championship. So just your overall thoughts on that game to start.
Sure, it was a good watch. Or a good portion of the game. Now I'm watching this thing. It's 7-6 at the half, and then Green Bay takes the lead in the third quarter, and you're like, Green Bay may do this, and they're a young upstart team. As you're saying, we've seen this over the years. Teams that they're building towards something, maybe a year or two down the line, and this is their first really strong foray into the playoffs with this group, and particularly their quarterback Jordan Love. He was playing very well. Yes, he did have that tip pass early on that was intercepted, and then ultimately he had to pass that was closed the game out to Dre Greenlaw. But when I watched him play, he seemed very poised in the pocket. He was making big throws. There must be something about that Green Bay uniform because it's a lot of no, yes type passes. Brett
Yep,
Favre
yep,
type passes.
100%.
And over the last couple of weeks, he only had one interception and was playing so well on his winning streak. And the team kind of had found their identity, and it was really running the football with Aaron Jones. He had 18 rushes for 108 yards in this game, and I thought they kind of went away from him. And then you got to tip your cap to the Niners, who kind of said, okay, Purdy, this may not be his best day out there. It was cold, it was rainy, and he only was completing 59% of his passes. He had one TD, no interceptions, but he just didn't seem himself, and they decided to lean on Christian McCaffrey, a guy who we talked about could be possibly in the MVP conversation. 17 rushes, 98 yards, two TDs. That one long TD really broke this game open, and then he had the game closer. He also had 7 catches for 30 yards, so he had to contribute. And a big thing going into this week as they get ready for the conference rounds is Deebo Samuel goes out that shoulder injury, and you're like, uh-oh, this may be something that we have to watch with this Niners team because it just changes the identity of that offense. Yes, Ayuk really stepped up, had some big catches.
Yep.
Jennings had some catches. George Kittle had the touchdown. But, Debo is really that Swiss Army knife that Shanahan likes to use. So he beats LaFleur once again, his old buddy. He's 4-2 against him now. Solid win for the Niners, but you have to wonder, are there some cracks in the armor, and they're facing an upstart Lions team?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's a little bit of just injuries catching up, inconsistent play, and a little rust. Obviously, they have to play a more complete game against Detroit. That, again, another example of a team that you thought would maybe just kind of wax Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay hung around. And of course, we talk about Jordan Love, and then you get the bad decision by Baker Mayfield late. A little surprised that Todd Bowles decided, I'm going to take my last time out and go into the offseason with it, whatever. But Detroit, I look at Detroit, and they've got that home field advantage. They made the plays when they needed to make the plays. So we're talking about Brock Purdy making a drive. Jared Goff made the drive. I know they're a little banged up. They signed Ertz, as reinforcement, backup tight end who's been there before. I don't know how much, he's going to give them per se. But I'm looking at, to me, this matchup, I just feel, and we'll talk about it more on Friday, but just kind of glossing it over. If Detroit can run the football with a sustained level of success to open up some of the play action, I think their wideouts match well against San Francisco. Now, go back to that Tampa Bay game, and I just think maybe they overlooked. I don't want to say overlooked. Maybe they just, the third down conversions on both sides of the football, that's got to get cleaned up if you're Detroit. I looked at it as maybe as tight early on in that game, right? Because one went away from getting to the NFC Championship. And as I alluded to, we'll break down the games later in the week. But the quarterback, who's been under fire for a long time now, made the plays that he needed to make. I felt as though once they got a little more of a cushion, that Tampa Bay had that uphill battle. I mean, for all intents and purposes, when this game's 31-17 after they scored, I was shocked that Tampa Bay came right back. See, that worries me a little bit, the secondary of the Lions. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and cleaned up.
Yes, Aaron Glenn's group has struggled all season, and we talk about their inability to kind of stop offenses all season. They allowed 23 points per game, and they allowed a lot of teams to hang around, teams to put up big numbers. So that's going to be a tough situation for them, stopping this Niners explosive offense. Yes, Debo may not play, and I know we'll go over it more on Friday. But the big thing is when you talked about the divisional round. Detroit did this was the feel good story of the National Football League, and the crowd was into it. You saw people, there were tears of joy here. We're going to talk about other fan bases in a minute that had tears running down their face because their season's over. But the Lions really picked it up. They're going to go to the first championship game since 1991. And you talked about the key guy, Hugh. It's Jared Goff. He's 30 to 43 for 70% completion rate, 287 yards, 2 TDs, no interceptions. So, he has a lot to prove. A lot of people have always said, oh, he just was in the car when the Rams went to the Super Bowl and lost, and they only put 3 points up in the game. And then he gets jettisoned. But he's a true leader of this team. Dan Campbell has this group really excited, playing hard. And Jahmyr Gibbs is the key, him and Montgomery. They decided their identity is run a football, shorten the clock. I'm sure they're going to try in the NFC Championship game. Gibbs only had 9 rushes for 74 yards and 1 TD, but you just saw his explosiveness in this game. A lot of people comparing him to Barry Sanders on that long run. And this Lions team's fun to watch, but that defense, you do have to, is that something that's foreshadowing out there?
Yeah, that scares me a little bit. And then you move on to the AFC side of the ball. Texans, great story. CJ Stroud stepping up year one, rookie of the year. You throw him into that MVP conversation as well. But Lamar Jackson, I know people sit there and say, postseason, look at the performance. The guy solidified it. He's the MVP prior to going into the playoffs. Baltimore looked a little rusty, but again, you have to it happens sometimes when you get, you're well rested. And when they needed to just basically step it up and ratchet it up, it's exactly what they did. I mean, this game's 10-3, and then the Ravens turn around and you get the punt return for the touchdown, and it's a tied game, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, here we go. They punt, and then you get the missed field goal, and then another punt, you get to the half, and you're starting to get a little worried if you're a Ravens fan. But then, like all good teams / great teams, they come out of the locker room third quarter, that first drive, they go right down the field, they march it through. I believe it was I pulled it up, 6-play, what was it, about 70 something odd yards, 50 something odd yards. Boom, they punch it in 17-10. And they really, for all intents and purposes, they never looked back. They had Houston playing catch up. They had Houston trying to, go for some trick plays for fourth down plays when they were down 31-10. And then they tacked on the field goal late for the final margin, 34-20. Lamar Jackson makes that team go. We know that. Again, you look at the numbers, you look at his passing numbers, they're not gaudy, but yet you have to look at what he's doing with his legs. He had 11 carries for 100 yards. He had 2 touchdowns with his legs, 2 touchdowns with his arms, 4 total touchdowns. I mean, what more do you want this kid to do? And they ran for 229 at a 5.5-point clip. So the ground game churned out a lot of the clock when they were playing ahead with the lead, and they win it by 24. But a really nice season by the Houston Texans. First year under D'Amico Ryans and CJ Stroud. They're building something.
Yeah, it's another great story. Think about the Texans are a 4-win team last year, and they're picking very high in the draft, and
Mm-hmm.
they seem to make all the right decisions in the offseason. Cal McNair, who's the owner there, he did a good job in assembling his group, and D'Amico Ryan's the rookie head coach, and then he drafts Stroud, and then Anderson in defensive end position. They trade up to get him coming over, and that young man's also ascending. So great season for them. And Q, it was tight, 10-10 at the half, as you're saying. And everybody in Baltimore is like, oh man, is this another Lamar Jackson stumble in the playoffs? Because let's not
Yep.
forget, going into the game, he's 1-3 overall, 0-2 at home. So it's his home game. John Harbaugh fought, and his group fought hard for that home field advantage. And they used it to take advantage of everything. The crowd was into it from get go. It was cold out there, and you could see the players didn't care. They busted it open in the second half, putting up 24 points. And as you said, dominant performance by Lamar Jackson, just willing his team. They talked about at halftime. He kind of, not angry, but he wanted everybody to know how bad he wanted to win this game. So he finishes, as you said, he has 100 yards rushing, 2 TDs, that big long one up the middle, moving a change. And I think not over my dead body situation, but he really felt he had to do whatever it took to get this done. And he was using his legs to get this first down. So he was spying him at first, and then he broke it open with those long runs. So efficient passing, 16 and 22, 152 yards, 2 TDs, no interceptions. You're seeing the Ravens formula. They're going to be tough, physical, and defense, led by their linebackers, Roquan Smith and Queen in the middle. They were just dominant, just thumping guys. And after a while, you saw those young Texans kind of fall apart. So big win for them. But now they're going to host the Chiefs, and let's see. This is we talk about boxing all the time. This is
Yeah.
a step up in class. So
Yeah.
you got Mahomes coming in there. Mahomes, he's only played in AFC Championship games every time he's been to the dance. So
Crazy.
it's going to be a fun watch, and this Ravens team, they're happy to have that home field advantage because it's their first time. They don't have to go on the road. Remember, all those years
That's
they
right.
had to go through New England, they had to go through Pittsburgh, and now this group, this is their time. So, it's gonna be a fun game to analyze coming up.
Yeah, and you mentioned Kansas City, and you like them. I thought it was Buffalo's turn. I mean, that game we can talk forever about, but I just think it comes down to a handful of plays. Um, look, we can talk about the missed field goal late. I thought Josh Allen missed a couple throws. I felt each team was keeping each other in the game, and we're talking obviously of Buffalo and Kansas City in the divisional matchup in which Kansas City wins late and Buffalo misses a game tying field goal wide right. Sorry, Scott Norwood somewhere. Tampa Bay and the Giants Super Bowl against Buffalo. I have a problem with a couple things with this Buffalo team and this game. First of all, Kansas City is a very flawed team. I see them as that old heavyweight champion, right? The power hasn't lost you, but man, the legs are kind of shot. And that's what I'm looking right now. They're mustering for that last run, so to speak. And you mentioned Patrick Mahomes, 6 years as a starter in the NFL, 6 years now in the AFC Championship. It's friggin' unheard of. It shows you top heavy in the NFL with a couple really good teams and really great quarterbacks. But if you're Buffalo, you had such a great run to get to this point. You win a playoff game. You're at home. You have everything in your favor. And then you have the panic move on a 4th and 5 deep in your own end, and you're faking a punt. And mind you, what are you trying to do? Prove to the world that DeMar Hamlin is really, quote, alive because conspiracy theorists think he's not alive? I mean, a direct snap to DeMar Hamlin? What are we doing here? I mean, that to me reeked of a panic move. And I can't sit here and tell you that the head coach or the play calling on the offensive side of the ball lost Buffalo that game. I just thought they had too many gaffes, too many blunders. They had too many blown assignments. And ultimately, Kansas City, when they needed to make the plays, Patrick Mahomes made the plays. Josh Allen didn't make the plays. And at the end, 27-24. But I was just absolutely shocked. And by the way, I also hate, and we can talk about this in the offseason, the ball goes out of bounds, fumble, touchback. I hate that friggin' rule. It's stupid. Get rid of it. But Buffalo had this game. It's 17-13 going into the third quarter, and they got that Allen scamper with about 30 seconds left. I felt as if they come out and they put together a defensive effort and get the ball back. They take the momentum, they keep the momentum. But what do? They allowed Kansas City to go right down the field. Now, granted, they also scored in the ensuing possession, but I just felt that's not the game for them. Kansas City's going to win that back and forth battle, right? You score, I score, you score, I score. But as I alluded to, I just felt that when the game was on the line, Mahomes' numbers were not gaudy, but he made the plays. I didn't like the fact that Josh Allen had to drop back to pass 39 times. I mean, hell, they ran for almost 190 yards. I didn't like the play calling. I didn't like the fake punt. So there's a lot of crap in that game that I was not in
Yeah,
favor of.
sure. And it just showed you veteran leadership in these big type games up on one side in the Kansas City Chiefs and on the other side, the Bills, their desperation. They wanted it so bad. It's a home game. And you're right, Q. They're up 17-13 going into the locker room and they're kind of feeling good. And you have to finish the job. It's 4 quarters. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, they're preaching stay the course. And that's what their team did, And I do agree with you that this Chiefs team is vulnerable. They had some guys finally step up and make some plays. He had Rasheed Wallace. He had 4 targets, caught them all for 47 yards. That's dynamic going to see it. But then you had MVS. He had some big catches in this game. He's been killed all year. He had 2 catches for 62 yards in this one. And then in terms of the Chiefs defense, little banged up. They were not getting the pressure on Josh Allen that we thought they could. But the thing is, the Bills early on were physical and they were running the football. They were having quarterback power runs and just keeping everything going. And then they got kind of conservative in the second half and it kind of backfired. I guess they were trying to keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands, but then they had these 3 and outs. And then you
Yep.
talk about that inexplicable fourth down. I was just
Reeked of
shaking my head.
desperation.
And it almost looked like Sean McDermott didn't call that. I was like, did they audible to that? They said there was only 10 men on the field for the Chiefs, so maybe they were trying to take advantage of it. But it was just ill-timed and just poor execution there. Hamlin gets stuffed. And then yes, luckily the
They got the
Chiefs
ball
right
back.
away give it right back because McCole Hardman, he had fumbled earlier and they didn't lose it. And then they go with the end around at the goal line. They try to get too cute, Andy Reid, sometimes in those goal line situations. And Coleman
By the
fumbles
way,
it, and as you
not to
said,
cut
it goes out of the end zone.
not to cut you off real quick, Lloyd, but
Yeah,
also too, remember Pacheco wasn't in on that play.
yeah, I couldn't
He
believe that.
so I think he got banged up, right? When he turned the corner a little bit on his ankle, he wasn't in. I mean, so
Yeah,
maybe if he's in, it's a different animal and he's actually holding on to the football. But to your point, that turnover on downs, Kansas City fumbles, then the last 2 possessions, Buffalo punt, and they got the ball back with plenty of time. And I'm sorry, man. It's you have to make that kick. I mean, you got to make that
yeah,
kick. I mean, you're talking about what, a 44-yarder? It wasn't a horrible wind condition, snow down. I mean, that's a kick that you have to make. And of course, Nance with the bugaboo talking about the stats right before he lined up. It's always on the play-by-play guy, right? But I mean, you have to make that kick. I feel bad for the kid. The death threats and afterwards, all that other stuff is just ludicrous. It's sports. It's not life or death. But I believe that was Buffalo's window of opportunity shutting with that loss against Kansas City. I really do.
yeah. And it's a game of inches. We talk about it all the time. On third down and short, they decided to throw a bomb pass, and give Josh Allen his credit. It was potential 60-some yard pass. He threw it down the field perfect, and Diggs lets it go right through his hands.
Another
And
good point.
you're like, oh man, this team is snake bitten. We talk about certain organizations, they just can't get over the hump. And then that kick, Bass, it was windy out there, but my son, who's the poor kid, is a Bills fan, because he's always been a Sean McDermott guy. We have some ties with
Really?
him, and as soon as the kick was on, he's like, it's going to miss it. And he ran out the room, and sure enough, the kick's going down the middle, and that wind just blew it right out of the sticks. And it is tough because you feel for Bills fans, and I talked about the tears of joy for the Lions, and then everybody's seen the clip of that one guy, the Bills fan, just saying, "Oh man, is it ever going to be our year?" And you're wondering, you know, Brandon Beane, the general manager, Sean McDermott, these guys have been there a number of years, and the Pegulias that own the team, how much is enough enough? I don't think they're going to make any changes, but that roster, they got to turn it over because there's a lot of age, particularly on defense.
Yeah.
Um, the linebackers were very beat up. AJ Klein was out there trying to get it done. A guy you're familiar with, and you could just see he couldn't keep up with these young guys. So I think the Chiefs got a little lucky in this game, and unfortunately for the Bills, they just couldn't finish the job.
Yeah, so it's Kansas City, Baltimore, and then it's Detroit and San Francisco. Before we get to some of the stuff around the NFL news and notes, and again, Wednesday edition BYP with Q, Rich Quinones here, Lloyd Vance, kind enough to join us. Are we going to go Lackey first? Are you going to give it to the kicker? Or are you going to give it to McDermott and some of the play calling?
Well, it's funny, Hugh, because I was like, all right, I'm thinking maybe I should give it to the kicker. I couldn't do that to him. And then when I saw the article, about him getting the death threats and him
Horrible.
shutting down his social media, just terrible. I mean, I know there's gambling involved in all this, but it's still a game. You
That's it.
can't do that. And I was disappointed in that. And then I was talking to Angel on my show. I was disappointed with the Bills fans throwing all those snowballs and stuff, and nobody, CBS
Rivaling
didn't even
Philly.
say, yeah, they didn't even say anything about it. You know what I mean? Of course, all the Philadelphia fans say, "Oh, we get the bad rep," But there were two things I was disappointed with in that game. But in terms of Lackey, I gave it to Jordan Love. That throw was just
Bad.
inexplicable at the end. Just kind of self-destructive. And overall, a great season for him. But that was a no yes throw, and they had an opportunity to tie it up, maybe even take the lead
Yep.
there against a scrappy um, Niners team. But in the end, Jordan Love, those two interceptions killed his team, and that protecting the football is what he's done so well in their winning streak. So I gave him the Lackey.
Game ball Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, you're right on point. Yep. Yeah, Lamar Jackson was just incredible in this one. 16 of 22 for 73% completion rate, only 152 yards, two TDs, no interceptions. And we talked about that 11 rushes that just kept Texans on their heels. And he's explosive guy. So I don't think he's caring about, oh, should I get it done from the pocket, or he's just trying to get it done. And now he's going to probably get Mark Andrews back for this game,
Yep.
his safety blanket, and the Ravens are playing some good football. On offense, they're scoring about 28 points a game, and then their defense is just shutting people down. They're only allowing 16 and a half from the regular season per game. So, you know, this is a dangerous team. And like I said, it's going to be fun to analyze this game. I've been back and forth on this one. Um, it because you got Mahomes coming there,
Yeah.
and he's now this generation's Tom Brady. You remember how Brady was getting so good? Everybody was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I hope that guy loses." You know what I mean? So that's the level that Mahomes is playing at this point.
Yeah, and we'll dissect the games on Friday. By the way, Rappaport's tweeted out a couple of key injuries for the Chiefs per coach Andy Reid. Pacheco won't practice today because of a toe injury. He's getting better. Guard Joe Tooney won't practice today with a pec strain. So obviously, you love to have both of them out there. Certainly, you want Pacheco. It just runs so hard and violent. Reminds me of Ahmad Bradshaw, the way he used to run for the Giants. So you look around the league, 2:30 our time. McMullen tweeted this out. I mean, all signs are pointing back that Sirianni is coming back. So I guess right now, as it stands, they're meeting around 12. I'm sorry, 2:30 ish. I think it was tweeted out. Howie Roseman will meet with the reporters at the NovaCare complex at approximately 2:30. So I mean, it's pretty much like I said, it's a done deal. Again, you can debate whether you agree with it or not. Now, with all that being said, they cleaned house with their coaching staff. I guess my argument, and I've made this on Martinez and Company, as well as my show with you, if you're not going to trust him to build a coaching staff around him, then what's the point of even bringing him back?
Yeah, Q flat out, this is the stubbornness that I was talking about when you and I were saying, does he come back? Did he fire him? And the ownership is they decide this is their guy. it starts from the top. So Jeffrey Lurie
Hmm.
has empowered Howie Roseman. Howie Roseman has fingerprints all over this, and he wants to still prove that Sirianni is his guy. Obviously, there's that goodwill that we talked about, 34-17 in regular season. He's made the playoffs each season. He went to the Super Bowl. So, some people are like, don't, it's not even a question. But to me, yes, it is a question the way that team flopped down the stretch. And he just had no answers. So they're going to blame the coordinators. We kind of knew to decide it was going to be the fall guy, him and Patricia. That defense was, abysmal, and they couldn't stop anybody. But then they throw Brian Johnson underneath the bus, and there's
Yeah,
a lot of open questions out there. And he needs to figure it out because he's on a 1 year contract now going into next season. Kind of a lame duck guy coming out there. And Q, I got to start wondering: is this next season's Brandon Staley situation? We knew Staley came back this year
good
with the
point.
Chargers. They bring him back. They change some coordinators, this and that, but nothing worked. And then they eventually fire him. So, you don't wish that on Sirianni. And I've been listening to fans. I listen to all the radio and everything here in the Philadelphia area. But it's just like he has got a lot to clean up in terms of this team, and Howie Roseman does as well in terms of the personnel because they had guys that are old, they had some missed draft picks, they got to clean up. And to answer your question in terms of bringing in these coordinators, what type of guy is going to come there? So you bring a Ron Rivera per se, they interviewed him
Hmm.
to come in and run that defense. Well, you have a guy that's been a head coach before. Is he the coach in the wings? How is he going to work with Sirianni? Um, how do they meld all this together? And he's supposed to be a CEO type and drive the whole organization. And I just don't see that from him. So, they're talking about Cliff Kingsbury. They interviewed him for the OC job. So he could possibly have two former head coaches on his staff. And I think with his ego, he's probably going to be looking over his shoulder. So it
That's
could
the
be a
other thing.
disaster waiting to happen.
That's the other thing. That's the one when you have guys that were former coaches, you're right. You're almost sending a message without sending the message, but a smart coach or person would figure that out. And you mentioned the Brian Johnson situation, the offensive coordinator, where heads were going to roll. And now there's talk that Jalen Hurts, people within that building are not happy. You needed that fall guy. But then if that's the case, if you're not happy, then are you going to get rid of the coordinator or are you going to get rid of the head coach? I mean, it's an aging team. They've got veterans on this team. The quarterback, it's pretty evident, regressed severely, regressed at the most inopportune times during the season, was not playing at an MVP level. They had dissension. They had issues on the sidelines, issues in the locker room. Fletcher Cox, Darius Slay, Patricia, A.J. Brown, back and forth. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason to follow if you're a Philadelphia Eagles fan or doing what we do. But I also believe that part of me was like, there's a percentage where maybe Sirianni's like, I don't even need this anymore. But yet you're not walking away from 7 million. Would I be shocked today if they announced that they were firing Nick Sirianni? No, it's not going to happen. He's coming back. But they do need to really fill out that coaching staff and they have to do a better job. And we're going to hear all these names are going to be tossed around in the barrel and the stew. And as you mentioned, a couple of different coordinators here and there. I find it interesting also, too, that if you look around the league and the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh have not struck a deal yet, right? So I'm wondering if he's leveraging what's going on with the Chargers, potentially get a bigger contract, more money out of Michigan. I'm also a little surprised that Mike Grable's name hasn't surfaced more. You mentioned Ron Rivera. And then lastly, it's a little surprising to me that Bill Belichick has not taken a lot of calls. I mean, Bill Belichick interviewed with one team, correct? The Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah. So, Q, it's interesting because I always said Harbaugh's that first domino. It has to fall. I,
100%.
I know we've had Antonio Pierce and Mayo. They got the jobs quickly with the Raiders and the Patriots, respectively. But these other jobs, Atlanta, Carolina, Washington, the Raiders, Seattle, Tennessee, they're all and the Chargers are all sitting out there. So I think Harbaugh is going to go with the Chargers. That's what I'm hearing out there. Brandon Brown, who you're probably familiar with, he's the Giants' the
Yep.
assistant GM. He's going for his second interview out there with the Chargers. He has close ties to Jim Harbaugh. So I think in the end, Harbaugh is going to say, you know what, the NCAA is not worth all the trouble and stuff coming his way because they're going to talk about sanctions and missing more games and all that stuff. I don't think he wants to be involved in that. And I think the Spanos family really wants to win now. And they're gonna give him what he needs out there with the Chargers. So I think that will fall into place, and then maybe you'll see some of these other coaches. Um, Obviously, Belichick would then be the leader in the clubhouse for the Falcons as well. So Arthur Blank, I hear, really wants to have him in there. And then I'm also surprised, like you are. Vrabel is a tough coach. He's going to drive his players. He's a leader of men. I think he's going to get an opportunity. But the funny thing is, Q, nobody's talking about that Carolina job. David Tepper, the owner, has created such a terrible
We talked
atmosphere.
about it last
You know,
night. Who would
yeah,
want it to?
I,
Who wants the job?
exactly. It's going to have to take somebody, like D'Amico Ryan's was like, all right, I'm taking this Texas job. I don't care what anybody says about, Cal McNair and the environment there. But Easterby was there at a certain time controlling the
Well,
strings and it was got ugly. But yeah,
how about
Carolina's worse.
Eric Bieniemy?
It You wonder, is now the time? And he did a pretty good job with Sam Howell. Their offense was top 10 in terms of yards and scoring. So they did a nice job there. Obviously, you wonder how much control he had with Ron Rivera still there. But Bieniemy, you would think he would finally get his opportunity. And the good thing is the NFL, we've seen two minority coaches
Mm-hmm.
hired this cycle. It seems maybe they're starting to, I'm not saying even things up, but maybe have a more level playing field. And look, Hugh, now's the time. I wonder. One guy told me, he's like, when I went into the room and they were interviewing me, he was going for a coordinating job on the team. He said they gave me the marker and sat me at the whiteboard. Show me what you got. You know what I mean? That's what these guys want. They want a. I'm not saying it, but maybe he's not good on the whiteboard or something. I don't know what it is. You know what I mean? It's been a lot of years. He's had a lot of success. A lot of people said he's the modern Sherman Lewis, who was with the Packers and never got his chance. He was OC there because they said he never called the plays. Well, now the enemy is called plays for
Yep.
Washington. We'll see if he's getting his chance. So hopefully one of these situations will fall towards him. And I'm thinking Dan Quinn may end up with one of these jobs as well, possibly Seattle.
So Telesco, new GM. The Raiders named the ex-Chargers executive. The Titans promote Carthon. They announced Callahan hire. Not bad. And then you got Barry finally out as Packers defensive coordinator, which we knew that was going to happen. Yeah, it'll be very I just think the NFL now, there is no more patience with anything, whether it's the players, the draft picks, the quarterbacks, the coordinators, or the head coaches, and in some cases the GMs. It's a win now league. We know that, hence the not for long. But the retread, the recycling of some of these head coaches, we've thrown out the names, the Belichick's, the Harbaughs, the Pete Carrolls. We haven't even mentioned him, the Mike Grabels of late. So some teams will jump to the forefront. They'll think a little bit outside the box. Years ago, when the Eagles hired Andy Reid, no one knew who the hell he was, right? I mean, it happens sometimes. Bill Parcells, Giants went 3-13-1, I think, and or 3-12-1, and Parcells was on the hot seat, and then they made the playoffs the next year, 84, 85, Super Bowl in 86, 89 playoffs, 90 Super Bowl. So they had their run. You have to have patience. Some of these owners and some of these GMs do not have patience with some of these head coaches. And, as much as we criticize and I rip on Sirianni, playoffs 3 straight years, and also to the Super Bowl, play away from winning Super Bowl, the narrative changes, right, on Sirianni and Hurts. They get a free pass for a couple of years if they win that Super Bowl. And who knows if those coordinators are still walking or they want to run it back. But a lot of times when you have success, people want to start poaching. And then all of a sudden, your coaching staff, that tree, the branches get cut off and you got to rebuild and retool. So I'll give a listen at 2:30 just to see what's been said, but I'll laugh, with the whole nonsense of the gold standard, because you bet your ass that if they were in a meeting for that long, Sirianni basically had to sell them on himself and his vision of how he can build a coaching staff that will equate to wins on Sunday. Anything less, he wasn't going to have a job.
Yeah. Yeah, Kim, and I think he went in there, not that he groveled or anything, but He had to
Grabbing
make
the knee,
sure he was
the
on.
leg.
He had to be on the same page with Roseman and
Yeah.
Laurie, and particularly again, because Roseman
Yep.
Jeffrey Lurie's kind of hands off. He picks his guy, whether it's Joe Banner or Roseman, to kind of run the show, and he's kind of in the background approving things. So, Sirianni better went in there with a plan. And then there's always that thing that Patricia, we know Patricia got put on his staff, so he can always say, you stuck me with that guy. Give me a chance to pick my own coach, to develop my own plan. But he has to have a plan, as you said. Q, is he just the cliche? Because a lot of times that's all he is. He's making the faces, and he's saying just it's not nonsense, but like, all right, are you truly a leader?
Yeah.
Are you going to step up and run this team? And down the end of the season, everything was fractured from top to bottom, and it landed on his lap, and he just let it happen. And his team was lifeless in that Bucs loss, and he did not make any adjustments. And then you talk about Hurts, he's got a piece of this too. He's the 200
No
something
doubt.
million-dollar quarterback. They're stuck with him. They're not going to make any changes, and he's got to do better as well in terms of on the field, and also maybe with his relationships. I'm seeing some rumblings that some of the guys may not be on the same page with him. So,
It's a
a
fair
lot
point.
around the Eagles.
It's a fair point, and it's a fair criticism. We'll see how it shakes out. Again, that presser will be at 2:30 if you want some boring radio. Tune in wherever or go online. I'm Lloyd Vance, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football 1029 The Game, part of the Broad Street South Network, our contributor on Q, and of course, BYP. All right, we will preview the games heavy. We'll look at some of the lines as well, some player props. That'll be on Friday's edition of BYP. And I look forward to it. And then, boom, we're going to blink. You got the Super Bowl and then the season's over. I mean, again, I do
Yeah,
not know where the hell the time flies.
it goes too fast, Q.
It does.
I love talking about this. We'll have all off season, for hot stove and everything. There's always something going on
Yeah.
around the league, but
Yeah.
there's nothing like the anticipation of a
No.
big game, and that's what you got coming up in the AFC and the NFC.
Yeah, it should be good ones on Sunday. We'll break down everything on Friday's edition of BYP. Of course, Lloyd Vance, kind enough to join us from our good friends over at Play It Again Sports. Check them out online. Put in the New Jersey Deffert location. All right, brother. Appreciate you. We'll talk on Friday and do it again.
All right, Q. Thanks for having me on.